Hey, how you doing? Sorry I'm a little late. I've got to blame my rabbit here. He was out in his hutch, and I had to go out and get him out, drag him in, clean him up, sit him down. So I'm a little late, but better late than never.
Well, well, well,
Mhm.
well, if you didn't have exactly any, if you had a little trouble trying to diagnose what today's significant moment in Disney history might have been all about, well, here's someone to help explain it. Ladies, meet Gary K. Wolfe, the author of Who Censored Roger Rabbit, the graphic novel on which Who Framed Roger Rabbit is based on.
Correct. Glad to be here. Glad that anybody still knows my name after all these years. But you're right. This is a very, very significant day in Disney history. Actually, 35 years ago today, Roger Rabbit premiered at Radio City Music Hall. And the rest is history.
Yeah, I thought it was on the 22nd.
Say it again.
Yeah, I thought it was on the 22nd of June.
I think it was the 21st, but today I think is the 21st.
Yep. I mean, it's summer and
Well,
yeah,
whatever.
triple digit heat where I'm at.
Whatever. It was 35 years ago. Let's say this week. And I remember I was sitting in the VIP section of the theater, which was the first balcony, and I had sitting on my left Kathleen Turner, who of course was the voice of Jessica Rabbit, and sitting on my right Amy Irving, who was Steve Spielberg's wife at the time, who was the singing voice of Jessica Rabbit. And I was about to see my movie, all the way through from start to finish for the first time ever. And I'd seen it. I'd seen bits and pieces. I'd been there for a lot of the filming. I'd watched the animation, but I'd never seen the whole thing cut together, start to finish. And I'd never seen my credit on the screen. So this was kind of a big deal for me. And I'm sitting there, between these two beautiful women looking at what is about to happen and what I'm going to see on screen. And I'm thinking, life just doesn't get any better than this. And then by golly, life got better because Kathleen put her hand on my knee and leaned over and whispered in my ear, "Gary, are you excited?" And I said, "Kathleen, you have no idea."
Oh yeah. It's kind of a little bit of a some people around here have a bit of a spotty connection. I think it's because of not every place with internet it has the best connection. I'm out in more of a rural area now because I've suddenly got out of the city or something like that, or north or a suburban area of a city. So
I'm within the Metroplex of Texas, so we actually got a good signal here.
okay, so Julia, since you weren't here for the last two meetings, it turns out we have already
Recap
discussed
time.
about the Black Cauldron and how that was a bomb for Disney, how that lost to Care Bears of all things, and how the new leadership at Disney came in, and how Disney suddenly started to embrace home video, and the marketing tactic for them to get people to buy them rather than just rent them would be to say, "Hey, get these videos out before they go back into the vault." And we already discussed about The Great Mouse Detective, which is the first movie under the then new management at the Disney studio, directed, which is the directorial debut of Ron Clements and John Musker, who would prove significant in the Disney history. Now, and how suddenly Spielberg wanted in on the action. Now we come to
and now the stage is set, right?
We come to a pretty unique point in history where somehow this project suddenly gets people interested in animation again. But it kind of is a big significant visual effects projects. So it all began with Gary K. Wolfe's graphic novel, and this is probably the closest I'm gonna come to talking with J.K. Rowling. And I don't want to talk with J.K. right now for reasons.
Okay, Jordan, we get it. Have to excuse him. He tends to sidebar from time to time.
Yeah, he is an author like J.K. Rowling, who, and pretty much all began with his story. So the best question I can start off with this is, how did you decide to write Roger Rabbit, and why Disney would suddenly take on a project of this magnitude before deciding they suddenly needed some external help?
Sure.
Yeah. How did it all begin?
Sure. Well, it all began when I come from a very small town in Illinois called Earlville, farm town. And my dad ran the pool hall there. My mother worked in the school cafeteria. And it all started back then when I was in the second grade, actually. I was given a picture to take home and color. And the whole object of the project was to stay inside the lines. That was the only requirement, stay inside the lines. So I took this picture home and, I started to color it, and I was great at staying inside the lines. So I was coloring it, and the picture was typical farm scene. There was a meadow, there was a fence, there was a farmhouse, there was a barn, and there was one cow all alone out in the middle of that meadow. So I colored the meadow green, grass. I colored the fence brown, colored the barn red, colored the farmhouse yellow, because that's the color farmhouses were around Earlville. And I get to the cow, and I'm looking at that cow, and that cow was all by itself out there in the middle of that big field. And my mom always told me that when people were all alone, that they got sad and they got lonely, they got blue. So I thought, man, works for cows, works for people, must work for cows. So I colored that cow blue. And I passed it in the next day. And the day after that, the teacher handed all the papers back except for mine. And she said to me, she says, Gary, she says, come on up here and stand in front of the class. And I thought, oh man, I stayed in front of side the lines better than anybody. She said, face the class. I faced the class. She put that picture up over my head. And she says, class, she says, look at this stupid picture. She says, look at this. She says, everybody knows cows are brown, cows are black, cows are white. Cows are sometimes brown, black, and white, all three together. Never, ever, ever are cows blue. She says, Gary, don't ever do anything that stupid again. And she called my mom, and my mom had to go to school, which was a big deal for my mom. And so she said to my mom, I think Gary needs some psychological help. He may not be all there. And so that night, my mother and father called me into the living room, and they sat me down, and my mom said to me, she says, Gary, why did you color that cow blue? And I said, well, Ma, I says, well, it wasn't really me. It was you. You were the one who gave me the idea.
It was your fault, Mom.
People sad, lonely, it got blue. Cow sad, lonely, color the cow blue. So my mom sent me outside. She says, you go outside and play. Your dad and I have to talk about this for a while. And so I went outside to play, and you got to realize, like I say, my dad ran the pool hall. My mom was a cafeteria worker. My dad, and they were both children of the Depression. My dad had to drop out of school in the third grade to go to work. My mom had to drop out of school in the 8th grade to go to work. So these were not what you would call well-educated urban liberals. I mean, these were hardscrabble working folk, and I really wasn't sure how this was going to end up for me. But after about half an hour, my mom called me back inside. She says, your dad and I talked about this, and we decided the next time you want to color cow blue, you just go ahead and color a cow blue. And so she called my teacher and said, hey, let him do what he wants. We don't care. And that was the first, validation of my creativity, if you will. I've still got that picture hanging up over my desk.
Wow, how cool.
Everybody needs validation.
Yeah. And so, about a week later, the teacher gave us another assignment. she said, I want you to write what you did on your summer vacation, one page. So everybody else is writing about how they went up to Wisconsin Dells, they went to Chicago to the Museum of Science and Industry, they went to the Ottawa River or whatever. For my one page, I wrote about how I went into my backyard and I used string, tin cans, and aluminum foil, and I built a rocket ship and I flew to the moon. And the teacher just handed it back and says, well, that must have been quite the trip. So, from then on, I colored a lot of cows blue over the years, and started writing short stories. I wrote a ton of short stories, and I realized that, for every 12 short stories I wrote, I could write one novel instead and make a lot more money. So I started writing science fiction novels. First one was Killer Bowl, which was a novel about football is played in a dystopian future, played as a blood sport where they went at each other with knives and hammers and mallets and guns, and it was played on the city streets. And
I've made illustrations for like a similar project, but it was more of a graphic novel about like soccer being played in the Space Needle.
Yeah, not too different from MMA sports today. And based on that, I sold that one to Doubleday. Based on that, Doubleday gave me a contract for 3 more novels. Write anything I want. So the second one was A Generation Removed. The third one was The Resurrectionist. And the fourth one, I wanted to do something that was totally outside the box, something that would incorporate my loves of reading when I was growing up. And of course, when I was growing up, my mother, good mother that she was, told me, hey, if you want to get out of this town, you want to stay here and run your father's pool hall, what you have to do to get out of this town is to read. Just read, and that'll get you out of this town. So I read, but what did I read? Well, I read what kids read. I read comic books. And, I would go down to the Giles Smoke Shop on B Street Tuesdays when the new ones came in, and I'd read all I could before he'd throw me out. And then I'd buy whatever I could with my allowance, and I'd trade those with other kids. And so I was steeped in comic books and comic lore. The other thing that I read were the magazines that my dad had around the house. And my dad read what they call true crime magazines. And these were exactly as advertised. They were magazines that had stories about true crimes, and the true crime.
The origins of the true crime
murders.
podcast.
So,
the original true crime podcast.
The original true crime podcast. If you ever saw a movie called Road to Perdition with Tom Cruise, there was a guy in there played by Jude Law who was a photographer, and he would go to crime scenes and get there before the police got their murders, and he would sometimes take the bodies and rearrange the bodies so they were more photographically interesting. Then he would take pictures of them and sell them to magazines. And this was a real thing. There's a guy named Ouija, a photographer, and that's what he did. And that's what I read. I read true crime magazines illustrated with real pictures of real murders. Luckily, I graduated to a better state of detective fiction. I got into Raymond Chandler and Mickey Spillane and Dashiell Hammett, the giants of noir detective fiction. So those were my 2 loves when I was growing up, and I wanted to write a novel that combined noir detective fiction and comic books, and also cartoons, which I consider to be kind of an offshoot of comic books. And so I was looking around for a premise, not easily done. And I was watching Saturday morning cartoons, and I became fascinated not with the cartoons, which were pretty simplistic and kind of boring, but with the commercials, because I saw the Trix Rabbit, I saw Captain Crunch, I saw Snap, Crackle, and Pop, I saw Tony the Tiger. These were cartoon characters, and they were talking to real kids, and nobody seemed to think that was odd. And I said, wow, what a great idea that would be for a novel. I said, what would happen if you had a world where comic book and cartoon characters were real? What kind of a world would that be? So I spent a year researching all the conventions of comic strips and comics, cartoons, to see what sort of things they did that would be interesting and fun in a human world. And took me another year to write the book. And so I sent it to Doubleday, fourth novel on my 4-book deal. And for the first time in my writing career, they rejected it. I'd never had a reject. All my short stories, all my novels, never had a reject, but they rejected Who Censored Roger Rabbit. So I talked to my editor. I said, Sharon, why did you reject this? This is clearly the best thing I've ever written. And she said, yeah, we agree. It was witty, it was funny, it was certainly innovative, but it's so unlike anything you've ever done before. So unlike anything anybody's ever done before, that I had to send it to the marketing department. And they were the ones who rejected it. So I called the marketing department and I said, hey, why did you guys reject my novel? And they said, well, we all thought it was really, really good, but there's no category for it on the bookstore shelves. It's not regular fiction. It's not a standard mystery novel. It's not a children's book. Not a love story, not a romance novel. There's no category for it. We can't sell this book. And I said, well, what would you do if somebody today brought you Gulliver's Travels or Alice in Wonderland or The Wizard of Oz? What would you do with those? And he thought for a minute and he said to me, I couldn't sell those either. So I went to my agent and I said, Bill, I said, if I can't sell this book, I don't want to be a writer anymore, because this is what I want to write. And and if I can't sell this book, then I'm done. He said, no, don't worry about it. Good book. We'll find a home for it. So he started sending it out to other publishers, other editors at the same publisher. And along the route, it got 110 rejects. It was rejected 110 times. Lots of times by the same publisher twice, a couple of times by the same publisher 3 times. In those days, rejects came in by mail. We didn't have emails and electronics, which I guess is how rejects come today. I don't know. But my wife used to call my trip out to the mailbox every day the daily disappointments, because I'd go out there and come back with a fistful of rejects on Who Censored Roger Rabbit. I never lost hope, because my agent believed in me. I believed in the book, and he convinced me that sooner or later we would get this book published. So eventually, on submission 111, the book went to St. Martin's Press, and a woman named Rebecca Martin, who was an editor for them, had just published a big bestseller for the press. And so they gave her a vanity project. They said, look, the next book you publish, you can publish any book you want. Whatever you want, you can publish it. So it's, little thank you from us. And just at that time, Roger Rabbit came across her desk, and she read it and loved it, like all editors loved it. It was always the marketing department who said no. So she went to the head of St. Martin's Press, the president of the company, and said, here's the book I want to publish. And he said, okay, I'm going to take it home. I'm going to read it tonight. I'll get back to you in the morning. So he took it home, read it, came back to her in the morning, called her in his office, says, Rebecca, he says, I told you that you could publish any book you wanted to publish, but you can't publish this because I can't sell it. And Rebecca stepped up to the plate and said, hey, you told me I could publish any book I wanted. Publish this book or I quit. And so they published the book. And I guess I owe my career to Rebecca, and I've repaid her over the years, but they did not publish it in any great quantities. They published 5,000 copies, which is kind of next to nothing. And, people have often asked me if I could go back and relive my life, what would I do differently? And I'll tell you, if I had a time machine, I would go back to 1981 when that book came out. And I would buy them all, because they came out priced at $2.98. And now if you can find one on eBay, they're well north of $500. So I would have bought them all back in 1981, put them in a barn somewhere, and I'd bring them out today, and I'd be living in a castle in Spain. But they bought the book in 1980. It came out in 1981. It took a year for the book to get into the cycle and get published. So in that year, between 1980 and 1981, I get a phone call at home on my home line, and I answer it. Yeah, the voice on the other end says, "This is Gary K. Wolf." I said, "Yes, it is." He says, "Well, hi, this is Roy Disney with the Disney Corporation." And I said, "Yeah, right. Disney calling me at home. That's going to happen." I says, "Who is this really?" I thought it was one of my friends having me off. And he said, no, it's really Roy Disney." He said, "I just read your book." And I said, "Yeah, right. Book hasn't even been published yet." He says, and it turned out that somebody in St. Martin's, I never found out who. I tried because I wanted to kiss her or him full on the lips. But somebody sent the book to the Disney company and said, "Hey, we're just getting ready to publish this book, and we thought that it would be perfect for you." And it was. You were talking about it. I mean, Disney was not in great shape back in 1981, 1980. They had been offered ET, they turned it down. They've been offered Star Wars, they turned it down. They were making movies that were mostly intended as to be the second half of a double feature, of which there were no more. They were making movies about flubber and nutty professors, and the black hole and the black cauldron, which disappeared down the black hole. They were making really bad movies, and they were in danger of becoming not just a second-rate, but a third-rate movie production house. So they needed a project that would kind of leapfrog them back up into the ranks of major studio production facilities. And they saw Roger Rabbit as being that project. The other reason why they wanted this project, I don't know if you've ever noticed before, but there are a lot of people who wear T-shirts, hats, raincoats, whatever, with Disney characters on them. Now, Disney makes a lot of money from this, right? And their characters were going to be a little stale. They needed some new characters to infuse some new product revenue into their revenue stream. They still had Mickey Mouse, but Mickey Mouse had become kind of the corporate spokesmouse. He wore tennis shoes with his tuxedo, and you really couldn't have any fun with him. You can have fun with Donald, but Donald, nobody can understand what he said. So, he was kind of out. So they saw Roger, Baby Herman, Jessica as a whole line of new characters that they could merchandise and sell as product. So they asked me if I would sell them the rights to the movie. They offered me more money than I had made for everything I had written up to that point put together.
Wow.
So I'm not about to say no, even though I knew what Disney's situation was. I knew what kind of movies they were making, and I really didn't think they could make this movie. I really didn't think they could take my story and translate it into a film story that was going to be any good. But I'd known enough writers who had sold enough books to enough movie companies to know that if you're willing to take the money, well, it's not your baby anymore. And the movie company's going to do with it what the movie company's going to do with it. So I said yes. For the first 5 years, they had the project from 1980 to 1985. Disney pretty well proved me right. They really were not able to bring together the resources that they needed to do this project. And admittedly, some of that was not their fault. The technology did not exist to do animation that was realistic enough to be put into a live action movie seamlessly. They just didn't have that technology. In fact,
But
later,
didn't they do that before with Song of the South?
yeah, but if you look at Song of the South, do you really believe that those characters are real? I don't think so. Same with Mary Poppins. And a lot of it, we'll get to that, but I'll tell you why Roger succeeded when the others didn't. One day, Roy Disney called me and said, "Hey, we're not having any luck with this live action animation concept. So what would you say if we, instead of animating the characters, if we had them in costume, like we have characters at Disney?" And oh man, I'm going to have the Disney stable of characters in my movie. I'm going to have Fred McMurray as Eddie Valiant. I'm going to have Haley Mills as Jessica, Dean Jones as the Rabbit, and Kurt Russell as Baby Herman.
Oh, now that is, oh man, I can't imagine how that would have turned out.
If you like it well enough, maybe we'll pitch it. We'll do that. So, I said, "Don't you think that compromises the premise just a little bit?" And they said, "Yeah, you're right, it does." So they went back to trying to figure out a way to do animation and live action. And I doubt they ever would have succeeded, but in '85, a couple of things happened. Roy Disney got forced out, and he was replaced with Michael Eisner. And Mike brought with him Jeff Katzenberg. And Mike and Jeff had worked together. They had done a ton of big budget, really impressive movies, I think at 20th Century. And the first thing that they did when they came into Disney was to cancel every project that Disney had under development, because that's what new management always does, because that's what got old management in trouble, except for Roger Rabbit. They looked at Roger Rabbit and they said, "Hey, this is the movie that we have to make. We have to make this movie." So they left only Roger Rabbit on their docket, and they did something that nobody at Disney had ever done before, not with any movie ever. They brought in an outside producer, and that outside producer was a little known guy named Steve Spielberg.
Oh yeah, and they, well, not only did they bring in Steven Spielberg, who was kind of competing with animation involuntarily, but they also would bring in an old friend from the past, Art Babbitt, involuntarily. Yeah. Now he's now returned in our story of Disney. So,
yeah,
Julia, you weren't really here when we talked about Dumbo and stuff. Art Babbitt, as you can recall, and earlier in our Disney story, he was the guy who started off on Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. He was one of the master animators, and he was also the one that facilitated was not very pleased with how animators were treated at Disney at the time, and he was the one who facilitated the strike against animator strike of 1941. And in an attempt to describe how I felt Art Babbitt must have felt about Walt Disney at the time, in the uncut video, I attempted to say word for word the angry rant that Clark Griswold did against his boss after he got his bonus in Christmas Vacation, but I cut that out because it was not appropriate. And the reason for why I wanted to do that is Christmas Vacation is a classic. I watch it every holiday season. It's but where he covers his house full of lights. You got the rocket sled, the burning of the tree, the squirrel, the Todd and Margot being annoyed.
They bring him on when they brought him on.
Interesting, but let's get back to Roger Rabbit. Okay, so Disney brought Spielberg in. Spielberg, the first thing he did was bring in Bob Zemeckis, and Bob Z and Spielberg had read my book. They always thought it would make a great movie, so they kept me on in a consulting capacity all through the movie, which is something that never happens with a book's author, but it happened with me. So the first thing that Steven wanted to do was to bring in a master animator to oversee the Disney staff, and the Disney staff was really opposed to this because they thought, "No, we're professionals, so we don't need something like that." But finally, Steven said, "Yes, you do need something like that," and he started interviewing master animators. And so he brought in Chuck Jones, who of course is the guy who created Bugs Bunny. And I was charmed by Chuck Jones. He was just a great guy. Everybody wanted Chuck Jones. Steven wanted him. Bob Z wanted him. Everybody wanted him. But after we talked to him, he was at the time in late 70s. And we started to realize that the demands of this project, which were going to take at least 5 years, would be so excruciating that the project might well kill him. And it's the first time in my life that I've ever seen anybody in Hollywood that had any empathy for an employee. So they decided not to bring him on for fear that he might die as a result of the project. So then they took a look at the guy that did Fritz the Cat, Ralph Bakshi, and Steven thought that he was kind of a goon. So we did not pursue him. And I also always wondered what he would have done with Jessica Rabbit. But
Oh man.
then they took a look at Richard Williams, Dick Williams. And Dick Williams was an expatriate animator living in England. And he had won an Academy Award for the Pink Panther, had all of the right credentials, had the right temperament, incredible animator in his own right, and a good manager. So we brought him in, and it was actually Dick that I sat down with to visualize what these characters looked like, because they were a book to me, and I had never drawn them because I can't draw. So Dick worked with me, and we left Roger pretty much the way he is, red overalls, blue and yellow checkered bow tie. Dick added the little orange top knot up on top because he thought that gave it a splash of color. And Dick also thought that in the book, Roger was a brown rabbit. Dick thought that as a white rabbit, he would pop off the screen more. So he showed me both versions, and he was right. So Roger was a white rabbit instead of a brown rabbit. Baby Herman is pretty much exactly as I described him in the book. Jessica, I based on the glamour girls of my youth. I based her on Rita Hayworth, Marilyn Monroe, and Amelia Lakowicz, who was a girl in the third grade that I tried to get a date with, but she wouldn't give me the time of day. So, that was Jessica. And also a cartoon character done by Tex Avery called Red Hot Riding Hood. And
yeah,
if you look at any of the Red Hot Riding Hood cartoons on YouTube, which you can still find, Wild and Wolfie, I think, and Swing Shift Cinderella, you will see that Jessica is Red Hot's granddaughter. I mean, same color red dress, same color hair. And then I think one of them, Swing Shift Cinderella, I think, Red Hot does basically the same dance that Jessica does at the Ink and Paint Club. So we had all the pieces in place. Now we had to find somebody to play Eddie Valiant, which was the most important part of the movie, because Eddie was the one that would convince the audience that the rabbit was real. And they also wanted to get a major star, somebody who's what they call bankable, somebody who could bring in the audience no matter what the project is, because nobody knew if anybody was going to come to see this project. Nobody even knew if it was going to be a children's movie or an adult movie. So we had auditions. We auditioned James Woods, Kurt Russell came in, the Bruce Willis, I think, came in. And finally, they found the guy that they thought was the perfect Eddie Valiant, and that, of course, was Bill Murray. So they signed up Bill Murray as Eddie Valiant, and it became obvious really quickly that Bill Murray was not going to work out. I mean, Bill Murray did not believe this rabbit was real, and there was no way that he was going to convince an audience that this rabbit was real. Bill Murray would always give it the side eye and say, "Oh my God, a talking rabbit! Where did you come from?" So they fired him, gave him $1 million buyout of his contract, and we continued looking. And everybody wanted Paul Newman. I wanted Paul Newman, but when we approached him, he would have done it, except when he found out it was going to take 5 years said, I can't devote that much time to a project. Then we wanted Harrison Ford, and the same thing. He could not devote 5 years to a project. So we finally found the guy that everybody said, all right, this is a bankable actor, perfect Eddie Valiant. So we hired Eddie Murphy. So Eddie Murphy comes in, and now we've got a black Eddie Valiant. And suddenly we're rewriting the script to make Eddie Valiant funnier than the Toons. And it's obvious that this is not going to work either. So Eddie Murphy gets bought out of his contract. He gets $1 million and a brand new Ferrari. And he goes off, and we're looking again. So over on the other side of Hollywood, Brian De Palma is making a movie called The Untouchables. And he really wants Bobby De Niro to star as Al Capone. But De Niro is engaged in some other project and, has to pass. So De Palma hires an English actor named Bob Hoskins to play Al Capone. Well, after about 3 weeks of filming, all of a sudden, Robert De Niro calls De Palma and says, hey, I'm loose. I finished early. I can come over to your movie and I can play Al Capone. So they fire Bob Hoskins. He's now got $1 million and nothing to do. So they said, let's bring Hoskins in and see what he can do. And I said, he's British. The guy's British. He's not just British. He's Cockney British. I had seen everything that he had ever done. The Long Good Friday, Mona Lisa. I thought he was a brilliant actor, but he was Cockney. And Eddie Valiant was the prototypical American private eye. I said, there's no way that he's gonna bring off the American accent and do it credibly. So let's give him a shot anyway. So we brought him in, and he was standing on an empty stage reading the lines, and he was the only actor that we saw on an empty stage who convinced you that the rabbit was real.
Wow.
And so he was incredible. He is and always will be my Eddie Valiant. I got together with him a couple of years afterwards when he was in Boston filming Mermaids, and we talked about it. And he told me that as the movie progressed, he actually could see the rabbit. The rabbit was real to him. And he said it took about 6 months before the rabbit fully disappeared. And his son was jealous because Bob was talking to this rabbit rather than talking to his son. People ask me, well, are you unhappy with any part of the movie? And I am, with one thing and one thing only. Bob Hoskins' performance in that movie was the best performance I have ever seen an actor give in any movie anywhere. He convinced people that those characters were real. He would be standing on a totally empty stage and convince you that there were talking buildings and Lena Hyena and Bugs Bunny and Mickey Mouse next to him, and do it seamlessly. And he didn't even get nominated for an Academy Award. He should have won the Academy Award hands down that year. In the scene where Bob Hoskins is thrown out of the club by Oingo Boingo, the gorilla, Bob is on a wire, of course, and he's flying through, but they drop him at the end so he can land in the boxes. When he landed in the boxes, he broke 3 ribs. And he had to get a doctor and he had to go in the hospital. And we thought, that's it. We're going to have to postpone shooting for a couple of months until Bob heals up. Next day, there's Bob all taped up. Hey, where do we go? That's the kind of trooper that Bob Hoskins was. So, we filmed in London because Steve Spielberg likes the food in London. Go figure. No, that's not really why. They had a 3-story soundstage at Elstree Studios, which we needed. They did not have a 3-story soundstage in the United States. They do now, but they did not then. And we needed the 3 stories because on the top story were the actual sets, and then on the middle story were the puppeteers who manipulated the real objects on sticks through holes in the floor to the third story. And then on the bottom floor was a bank of video monitors where Bob Z would hang out, and he would watch what was being filmed on the camera. And he had animators down there who were animating over the live action stuff so that Bob could see the relationship between the animation and the live action, because the animation wasn't done yet. It was being in process. In fact, live action was done way before the animation was done. So that was the reason we filmed in London. And it took 5 years. It took from 1985. Well, it took 3 years actually. 1985 to 1988. Premiered in June of 1988, and for a movie that nobody knew whether this movie was going to be a children's movie or an adult movie, or even if anybody would come to see it, was a sensational success. It was the highest grossing movie of the year, grossed almost $1 billion that year.
Billion. I don't know. I'm not sure about billion. Well,
780 million. How about that?
Worldwide.
Worldwide, yeah. 780.
Jordan, that's a lot of money.
Of course, it is a lot of money because
That's a lot of money. And
yeah, the film ended up saving Disney despite the high budget, which went up and up and up. It would turn out to be the most expensive movie of the age. I mean, you thought Superman was expensive. You thought Gandhi was expensive. You thought Black Cauldron was expensive. Here comes Roger Rabbit. And it's like $70 million, which
75 actually, but it's count. So, I went to the Academy Awards in '89, sat close enough to share to smell her perfume. And the movie won 4 Academy Awards. I got a 4-movie contract deal out of it for myself. I've since published 3 other Toontown novels. The second one was Who Plugged Roger Rabbit, where we standardized on the 4-piece stutter. I did Who Whacked Roger Rabbit, and I just recently wrote Jessica Rabbit Serious Business, serious with an X, which is an origin story that introduces Jessica, shows how she started out as Jessica Krumsky, a poor, plain, not very attractive shop girl, and how she went from that to become Jessica Rabbit, how she met Roger, where Toons came from, and how Toontown came to be. The story is really good. I consider it to be a woman's book. All of my beta readers for that were women, because old white guy writing a story about the essence of woman, hard to do. So I wanted to make sure that I did not denigrate Jessica in any way, that I didn't overly sexualize her, that I presented her in a fair and honest light. And all my beta readers, who were all women, came back, and the majority of the comments were something of the nature of, yes, this is the kind of woman that I've always wanted to be. So, hopefully we'll see that as a movie someday. I think that would be a great one.
We'll have to have you back when that happens.
Yeah, definitely have you back. It's
and the technology has gotten easier to do hybrid formats these days.
Yeah, I know, because
no, you were talking about Song of the South, and this is not the first time that live action and animation have been combined in a movie. I mean, Disney did it back in the 30s with Alice in Wonderland, the original black and white
Alice's Wonderland. That was the first thing of our Disney 100th marathon.
Yeah. Yep. And there was Out of the Inkwell. There were tons and tons of live action animated movies. But what made the difference here, let's say Mary Poppins with the dancing penguins. In Mary Poppins, they locked the camera, and the Julie Andrews and Dick Van Dyke danced in front of the cameras back and forth. The cameras didn't move. And that made it very, very easy for the animators to animate because they didn't have to change perspective. When Bob Z and Dick Williams had one of their first meetings, Bob Z said to Dick Williams, well, how do you want me to set up my camera? And Dick Williams said to Bob Z, just shoot the movie, however you want to shoot the movie, and we'll animate around it.
Yep, I've heard that line in the behind the scenes bonus on the Plus.
Yeah, and you can see that right from the get-go. That first scene in Roger Rabbit where they're in the kitchen, and Dick Williams animated that entire scene himself. And if you look at it, there's some interesting stuff going on. Roger is in a kitchen and the floor is black and white tile. Now, there is no reason why that floor had to be black and white tile. It would be much simpler if it was black tile or white tile solid, because it would make it much easier to animate. If it's black and white tile, film goes through a camera at 24 frames a second. So every 24th of a second, the perspective changes. And so the lines on all those tiles have to change every 24th of a second. And then to complicate it even further, Dick put Roger's reflection into the black and white tile. So now he's dealing with so many variables that I can't even tell you. And when that scene was shown, and when animators saw that scene, their jaws dropped. I mean, that was astounding animation. The other interesting bit of animation was when Roger and Eddie and Dolores are in the back room at the terminal bar, and Eddie bumps the lamp. And the lamp is going back and forth. And as it's going back and forth, the shadows of the lamp are also moving. And if you look at that scene, you'll see that just like that. You'll see that the shadows of Roger perfectly match up with the swaying lamp and with the swaying shadows of Eddie and Dolores. And that's an incredible bit of animation. It's so incredible that now animators call a scene like that bumping the lamp. And so, this really took live action animation to another level. There were technical developments that were invented for this movie that were actually used in other movies, because it took so long to produce this movie. Lily Tomlin and I can't remember, somebody else, Bette Midler, maybe, I can't remember, played twins. And they used the technology they developed for Roger Rabbit in that movie, which came out like 2 years before Roger Rabbit. And of course, ILM, George Lucas's ILM studios invented technology that they were using in Roger Rabbit that didn't exist back in 1980, 81. So everything kind of came together, and it was kind of a perfect storm of creativity and technology. Everybody on this movie wanted to make the best movie that they possibly could make, which is kind of unusual in Hollywood. A lot of them just treat it as a paycheck, but everybody was really invested in this movie. And I'm convinced that if we hadn't said, all right, this movie is going to premiere in June of 1988, I'm convinced those animators would still be working on it today, making it better and better.
Perfecting. Yeah.
So, I'll leave you with one story. Steve Spielberg wanted everybody in the movie to have the characters that were his or her favorite characters. And I'll show you what a difference it makes to have Steve Spielberg on a project. In 1982, Roy Disney went to Warner Brothers and said, hey, we're making a live action animated movie. And we'd like to have Bugs Bunny come out, say, "What's up, Doc?" and then leave. What do you think? And Warner Brothers told Roy Disney, get lost. There's no way that Bugs Bunny is ever going to be in a Walt Disney movie. So in 1986, when Steve Spielberg walks into Warner Brothers and makes the identical request, we'd like to use Bugs Bunny in a movie where I'm producing for Disney. Warner Brothers says, of course. Take them. Well, what about Porky Pig? About Wile E. Coyote and the Roadrunner? Sylvester and Tweety Bird. You want them? And gotta have somebody, Sam. So Stephen walked out with all of them. So when he was doing the movie and he was getting the characters together, he wanted to make sure that everybody who was involved in the movie in a significant way had his or her favorite character. Bob Hoskins was Heckle and Jekyll. Dick Williams was Droopy. And so he came to me and said, Gary, what's your favorite character? And I want to make sure I get it in the movie. I said, Steve, I got Roger, I got Jessica, I got Baby Herman, I got 8 million. I said, I think I'm covered. Oh, yeah.
They're all mine.
Yeah, they're all mine. He said, well, we'll do something for you. We'll do something for you. So if you watch the movie on DVD, when Eddie Valiant goes into Toontown and he's going through the tunnel and all of a sudden the curtains part, all of a sudden there's birds and singing and everybody's happy, and you got to be quick because it's only there for less than 2 seconds. If you look on the left as he's going into Toontown, you're going to see a brown fence, a red barn, a yellow farmhouse, a green meadow, and a blue cow standing all alone out in the middle of that field.
Oh, wow.
That could make
A
me
very
cry.
great
That's
tribute.
huge.
And another great tribute in the film is when Eddie puts his hat on a falcon, a tribute to the genre that this film is coming from, because it's like a reference to the Maltese Falcon, the stuff that dreams are made of. And Eddie Valiant is our Humphrey Bogart substitute.
He is.
Yeah.
And I will miss him greatly. All right. So, hey, guys, I got to go.
Yeah.
So,
Thank you so much.
It was my great pleasure. And happy 100th birthday, Disney.
Yes.
Happy 100th birthday, Disney.
Happy 100th birthday, Disney.
All right.
Thank you so much. That was awesome.
Yeah, it was my great pleasure. We'll see you.
Have a lovely night.
Bye.
Take care.
Bye.
Oh, wait. Whoa, so sorry. Oh my golly. Okay.
Yeah, Julia must have thought the meeting was over already.
I'm gonna say, hey, Julia.
Did you want to bring her back?
Yeah. Can you,
Yeah, anyway, I've done some of my own detective work, so to speak. But yeah, the reason for this lineup you put on here, I mean, when I saw the end credit was that it was like distributed by the Buena Vista Pictures. Yeah, definitely reminded me about how you mentioned that Touchstone was like an adjacent studio to Disney that wanted to bring like more, adult targeted movies, and that also would explain the flick itself was able to like freely use the Disney characters as opposed to finding characters elsewhere like Time Warner.
well, it's now called Warner Brothers Discovery. That's what it's now called. I just, I was like, I thought Julia would love this. I just, well, I don't know. I just, Julia, I didn't know you were gonna leave. Hang on. Let me get her on the phone and let's just see what's oh, hang on. Let me do a quick phone. Okay, Julia. Julia.
Mm-hmm. 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 Mm-hmm.
Oh, hi, Julia. Turns out we didn't like do do what the next week was gonna be, but I just want to let you know. So Disney now has a sudden huge hit with Roger Rabbit, and they suddenly get people interested in animation again with a combo live action animation production. But the merchandise for some odd reason doesn't sell as well as Disney wants to, and they needed to make something. Could they possibly get people invested in an animated feature again? Could they possibly get?
Okay, Jordan, Jordan, you're being over dramatic here.
Could they possibly sell merchandise? Could they figure out a way to get people really talking about a whole animated feature again? Well, turns out the seeds for such a comeback were being planted years, maybe decades before Roger Rabbit went into production. Next week, the story of how a red-haired sea creature who dreamt of life on the land gave
Jordan, and I think that's a bit wordy for like a sneak peek next time.
Well, what's the movie, Jordan?
The Little Mermaid.
Oh,
Sounds like somebody's excited for it.
I figured so. I'm doing it for you. I'm doing it for the fans because this is the point where the Disney Renaissance begins.
Yeah, that's good to know. Yep, so anyway, Jordan, I was trying to share some of my own designs with Mr. Wolf, and yeah, this is like a side character for like one of the stories I've been doing, but yeah, Bramble here has become like such an appealing character, and my sister Bonnie saw it.
Oh wow. So
Yeah, he's a ferret who's like a detective and like an
all right.
alien world, and it's complicated. I mean, that's why he's more like a side character, but
All right.
I think it would make a good side story with the main story.
Okay. We'll talk to each other next week. Okay, bye.
Okay, do one overtime here.
Bye.